Hi, this is Kelsey Cooper, and I'm the host for Disabled Birth Stories podcast. I hope those in the disabled community can enjoy these stories of bringing beautiful babies into the world and the journey along the way. I hope this podcast helps you feel seen, heard, empowered, and capable, no matter your journey to being a parent. I hope those who are able-bodied would listen to empathize with and support their disabled family member, friend, acquaintance, or random stranger. Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us today. After listening to this episode, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please also check the description for our social media links and the link to our merch store. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please consult your medical providers for all of your healthcare needs. Also, the views and opinions expressed by the guests are not necessarily the views and opinions of the host and vice versa. Hi, I'm Kelsey Cooper, and I'm here with Amy, and she's going to tell us her story today. Amy, can you start by introducing yourself?
My name is Amy, Amy Rae. I go by either Amy or Rae. I have a 6-year-old son, and I live with my family here in Canada.
Can you tell us about your disability and how it affects you?
So I was born with my disability. I have Marfan Syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder. I went my whole life thinking that my only diagnosis was Marfan Syndrome, but actually while I was pregnant with my son, I was fortunate enough to be able to access further genetic testing and found out that I have a secondary connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Connective tissue disorder kind of impacts like all over your body, so many different things and so many different ways that it kind of impacts me day to day.
Can you go into, if you feel comfortable, your fertility journey or finding out you're pregnant?
My pregnancy with my son, I wouldn't say it was like planned per se, but like we had to have a plan in place ahead of time. So my partner and I were like really excited about the idea of potentially having a family someday. From like the early stages of our relationship. I've wanted to be a mom pretty much as long as I've been able to identify with wanting to be able to be a mom, which was like a small child. When I got older, there was a lot of outside pressure from doctors that either didn't necessarily know what they were talking about or stigma from society that placed in my head that like I either wouldn't be able to have a child, like couldn't or shouldn't have a child. And it really like scared the daylights out of me. Like it made me scared. I had to basically, through the help of my doctor, seek out a specialized geneticist that was familiar with Marfan syndrome. And this seemed like it was like so far and few. The wait lists were so long. The doctor was from the States and I think it was once a year, came over to Canada and would see some of us, but it was like really, really hard to get in. So I had to wait a while. And, you know, I as soon as I went in and saw this doctor, it was just like, you know, like, why wouldn't you be able to have kids? Because he was so familiar with my condition and like so many other families that he had supported. His bedside manner was a little bit like, I don't know, like came off a bit strong, but it gave me a lot of hope either way. Like I left there feeling really, really good. But yeah, after that, it was just kind of like a bit more medical appointments, doctor's appointments, and just kind of figuring out what the plan would be once I got pregnant. And my partner and I were able to conceive like naturally at home and didn't require assistance like in that degree, but there was a lot of hands-on involvement from like the very second that I found out that I was pregnant, basically.
Did you go to a normal OBGYN or was there specialists that needed to be seen?
There's a lot of specialists. I found out in a doctor's office with my friend, and I kind of wasn't expecting to find out in that moment. But as soon as it was just honestly just like my regular family doctor. So I was being seen by the nurse practitioner, and she was just like, because of my health history, which honestly she didn't really know that much about. She just kind of like knew that, I had some, and I was disabled, and as soon as all I did was just like, it was a line on a little strip, right? There was no other testing, no further indication that anything else was going on other than I was pregnant according to this strip in my hand, and she was just so convinced that something was wrong. I was having like an ectopic pregnancy, and like sent me to the ER, and I had to call my partner on the phone and tell him over the phone, like crying, that I'm going to the hospital, and like that's basically how we both found out. It was really scary. And then from then on, I was sent to a more local OB/GYN who saw me one time and then referred me to a level 1 hospital down in Toronto, Ontario, where they have a specialized high-risk pregnancy clinic for patients with Marfan Syndrome.
Is there anything specific that Marfan Syndrome affects the pregnancy that they know for sure, like this is going to happen, or what kind of things do they look out for in the Marfan clinic?
So it really depends person to person, but the number one things that they look for are what is the health of the patient's heart like. That's probably the first thing that they'll do is an echocardiogram, EKG, something like that, and just check to see what's going on with the heart, because that's one of the number one things that they monitor, because of course, as pregnancy progresses, there's more strain on things like the heart. So it can be okay at the start of pregnancy with monitoring, but come say the second or third term or like postnatal, there could be complications. So those are the things that they monitor continuously, very regularly. For me personally, I have a full spinal fusion from like the top of my neck to my pelvic bone, which has also been fused and broken and rebuilt and fused. And so from the very beginning, before I was even able to become pregnant, the conversation of whether I would be able to deliver, vaginally or through cesarean, and the decision was cesarean before I was even pregnant. So to minimize the stress on both my heart and my like back pelvic region from pushing out a baby, they basically wanted to deliver my son earlier to minimize contractions and labor and things like that, which actually like didn't necessarily end up happening that way, but yeah. So those are the two things that they were most concerned about from my perspective. But the other thing that they monitor is if there's a positive genetic mutation, like diagnosis from the parent or parents, they're monitoring my baby as well. So my son they were able to do fetal monitoring, like a fetal echocardiogram, which was really, really cool. But we were actually involved with the Children's Hospital and the cardiologists before my son was even born, and just kind of explaining that, there's a 50% chance that my son could be born with the same genetic mutation that I have. And because of like it's a genetic mutation, the other thing that they monitor is the other person who contributed in conceiving the baby, what their genetic makings are like. Because if they also possess the same gene mutation, which is called the FBN1 gene mutation, it's incompatible with life, is what they call it, meaning that they don't believe that the baby would survive after birth, unfortunately. So that is something that they check, although not everybody has access to these things, as well as not everybody has access to even having a genetic confirmation and diagnosis to begin with, which can cause a whole other realm of issues for both the parent and the child. But in my case, that was the situation.
How physically did your pregnancy progress? Was there anything major that came up?
My pregnancy was okay. I mean, I was in a lot of pain. I had a hard time getting around, and I also, my heart didn't change in a drastic sense, but it was under a lot of pressure. I have something called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Tachycardia is when your heart rate goes higher than it's supposed to, and it can kind of jump around, and it makes you feel very faint, like you can pass out. It just makes you feel awful. And in my case, I ended up being hospitalized for about 2 weeks to kind of get it under control. But then I was able to go home. I made it home like the day before I was supposed to get married. I did get married, but I have like these big scars on my chest from all the leads that they had stuck up to me for like cardiac tests. But yeah, so they were able to get that under control. But come like the end of my pregnancy, I was on bed rest because it was just too strenuous for me to kind of like get around. But it was okay. Like I was able to add a few small modifications to my home that I rented, that I was able to take away and like have no damage to the home, which was cool. But you know, I was able to get by with the support that I have. So I felt very fortunate for that. And in terms of my son, he did show some fetal like heart issues before he was born on their monitoring. So he was monitored a little bit more closely. So, you know, the trips down to the city were more frequent the closer towards the end of my pregnancy that I got, but I had really good care. So.
And you said that toward the end things went a little differently than planned. So how did the end of pregnancy and the start of how that went go?
Yeah. I had experienced like some early like contractions and things like that, and you know, I was in the hospital a few times, and then they would send me home. I was admitted for it, and then they would send me home. So I was sitting at home. I was like 35 weeks pregnant. I was due to be induced and have a cesarean at 38 weeks. So I was sitting at home, and I was watching like Hell's Kitchen or something, like some Gordon Ramsay show with my partner, and we were trying to eat dinner, and I remember being like so repulsed by what I was eating. And it was like a beautiful plate of food. Like there was nothing wrong with it. And I was just like, I can't eat. I feel like weird, nauseous, off, just, I don't know. But it wasn't abnormal for me to feel that way. So I was just like, I stayed at home like maybe longer than I should have, but things progressed so quickly for me. So we went to our local hospital is how things ended up turning out. And basically when we got there, they looked at me right away, and they said that I was having contractions and that they needed to send me down to the city, and that like my son was probably going to be born tonight. So they like put me in an ambulance. And my partner had to follow. Now, like I didn't live close to the city either. I was like 45 minutes to an hour away to the city. And so my partner is following and we're on the highway, and like the paramedic that's with me was just this lovely gentleman, but he was like newer, and like he was trying so hard to not let me see that he was a little freaked out, but I could see he was a little freaked out. And so like I was freaking out, and he was just like holding my hand, and we're just like watching the monitors together. And he was like, your partner's right behind us. We're good. We're getting there really fast. Like, we're going to get you there. It's all good. And ended up being my contractions were just too close apart or together. And I was just like really progressing quickly in this ambulance. And they made a decision to turn around and go back to the local hospital. And my partner's like driving behind us, like, what the heck is going on? And he's just like kept driving to the city. I think he spoke to someone on the phone, but like I was in another realm, so I don't know what happened on that end. But basically what happened is they turned around, they went back, they gave me something to slow down the labor, and they put a L&D nurse in the ambulance with us. And we went as fast as we could back to the city hospital. And I just remember like looking at them, and I was like, please don't let me deliver in this ambulance. Please, please, please. I have to have a cesarean. I cannot have my baby here. And they were like, it's okay. Like, you're good. They're so reassuring and calm. And like their calmness rubbed off on me, and like things just like slowed down a little bit. Honestly, like I said, I was still in another realm. Like a lot of this is fuzzy for me when I think about it. I think I was like watching Home Alone or something in the L&D room with my partner, waiting for them to get everything ready for a cesarean, because my son was born actually on November 25th. So his birthday just passed on this weekend, which is actually kind of like fitting that we're talking about this, right now. I remember watching like Home Alone. That's one of the details that like stood out to me, because I remembered like the little kid just like, ah. And yeah, they were just like, you're gonna have a cesarean. And originally the plan was that, I had to be put to sleep for the cesarean to minimize the stress on my body. And my partner was supposed to stay in the room with me. And that's what we really, really wanted. Now that I'm a birth worker, I probably would, I would have advocated differently for myself, knowing what I know and having the tools that I have, now that I didn't have then. But I did not know how to advocate really for myself in that space. It was a very like, this is happening now kind of situation. So we had to kind of get those ducks in a row real fast. And my partner ended up having to stay outside the doors, all dressed up in surgical gear. It was really like hard for him. And I was put to sleep, which was hard for me. The nurses and the doctors, they were all different. And, the team that I had talked, with my whole pregnancy, because that's who was there that night. And they were fantastic. They were playing music for me and singing to me, and like seasoned pros. It's stuff that as a birth worker now I take with me. They're just their whole grace in the situation, and like the calmness that they all had, and like how that transferred onto me, being like put to sleep to deliver my child and not knowing like what was going to happen on either end. Like I've been through some really hard things, and I've been told some really hard things, and it was scary. Like it was a really scary situation. And they took pictures for me of the whole thing. Like I literally have pictures of like my son being born on my cell phone. Like I said, they're fantastic. The after part is also fuzzy for me, because I had some complications. They were small complications in the grand scheme of things. I think it was mostly just because I have 2 connective tissue disorders. It was hard for them to close me up from the cesarean because my skin it's a connective tissue and that's impacted. So all those layers of skin and tissue, every single one of them were impacted in their own ways. So it was like a whole realm of difficulties in that regard. Aside of that, it wasn't too long after, I would say. I think my partner said about 2 hours after we were all united as a family. I have pictures where I still have an oxygen mask on. I'm covered in wires and they're placing my baby on me. And it's good stuff. Because it is fuzzy for me. So for me to know that they had pictures and they took those pictures, it means a lot. So
You said parts of that were fuzzy. What was the immediate postpartum getting reunited and the stay in the hospital? What was that like?
Being united with my baby was the best feeling in the whole world. And my partner was there too. So it was whew, probably breathing for the first time.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just I felt like maybe the hardest parts were behind us. Not behind us, but we finished them, we did it. Some of the nurses were, really, really critical in that whole process for me. And my partner, and just learning how to hold my baby in a way that didn't hurt I was in a lot of pain, and I was in the hospital for 5 days, and they were monitoring things like that, and they were helping me through things like that. And I was really thankful for that. And I wasn't the first person that they supported that, was going through these things or even different things, so they had a playbook to kind of pick and choose from. And if one thing didn't work, they had other ideas, and they had classes and resources, which was really, really nice, because I felt when I left that little bubble, it wasn't so much of an understanding. Like I said, being a birth worker now, there are some things that I would know how to advocate differently for myself now than I did then, or say some misinformation that I was given that I just didn't know, and that's okay. Yeah, overall, I was there for 5 days, but it felt like a very necessary and helpful 5 days. Comfortable 5 days too. They were really, I felt like it was a really good place for me to be, although we were, like I said, an hour away from family and friends, so in a little bubble, but it was nice, which is not everybody's experience. I know that for sure.
Do you use any mobility aids at all?
Yeah, I do. So I have used a wheelchair. I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user. I have been for the better part of my life, probably since I was about 6 years old or so. But I also use canes, forearm crutches, rollators, leg braces, and it was definitely a learning curve when my son was born.
Was that a factor in the postpartum? I know they want you to get up and moving after a cesarean. Were they wanting you to do the same? And how was that getting around after having him?
That's such a good question. Yeah, actually, it is impacted. It's impacted for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. But for me personally, they wanted to minimize the stress on my heart, the stress on all of my tissues. Like I said, everything's impacted. So standing, sitting, all of it, it was all really, really hard for me. And it was a slower process than typically you might see after a cesarean, and what they might want to avoid things like blood clots and stuff like that. But they have other methods of supporting with things like that. So for me, I had a lot of swelling in my lower legs because there was a lot of fluid and stuff like that they were giving me extra stuff. So because my mobility was like already limited more than it already typically is, for me to have like regular leg kind of like massages was really important. But also I needed help, so I got like a remote control bed so that it could help me to sit up so that it wasn't so strenuous on my body. And then I had this like bar beside my bed to help stand. But it was a slower process. It took steps for me. Afterward, I did need to use my chair more than before, and my house was not, I've never really lived in an accessible, like a fully accessible house, I'll just say that. So it was super limited in where I could go with my chair, so like my independence and stuff was impacted. We ended up moving in with my in-laws who had stairs, and so a lot of, like, we had to transform the upstairs hallway into, like, I put like a little mini fridge. I put like a shelf with my son's things on it, and like I basically would like take care of him in the upstairs hallway and wait for somebody to be able to carry him downstairs and help me downstairs. Like it was a lot, and it was isolating, and it was hard. And I don't think, like I said, when I left that bubble, I was like not prepared. Like I've dealt with ableism my whole life. I have a visible physical disability, and it's just always been unavoidable. But the way that it smacked me in the face when I became a parent, it was like this different kind of hurt. Like it was like this, like I was very defensive about it and like insulted at first, and maybe even a little embarrassed by it at first, if I'm being honest, because it is so isolating. That was one of like the biggest barriers for me, was just figuring out how do I now navigate this world that's like just not prepared for some reason. Like we've always existed, disabled parents, like we've been here. The world's still not prepared for us. Like where's the adaptive equipment? Like, you know, I had to get a bassinet with wheels to put my son in and use that as a walker and wheel him through my house, or just like push it with my arms on the ground, like, because that's, you know, or to, I loved baby carriers because I'd put him in it and then I could wheel myself in my wheelchair. But if I put him in a stroller, it was so hard to hold his stroller and push my manual wheelchair, you know, and like adaptive equipment, it either doesn't it doesn't really exist where I am, and the ones that do are from like other countries, and they're like thousands of dollars. It's just not accessible. So sorry for the mini rant. It just fires me up.
Yes. Were there things in the hospital as far as accessibility that you would say you wish were better, or that you think, well, this is a hospital, why don't they do XYZ?
Yeah, there are. So the entire, like, I was in a specialized program. Like I said, I'm not the first person, but they actually ran out of the like accessible, like wheelchair accessible rooms. Like they ran out of them. So they actually had to give us, I don't even remember what the name of the room that they called it, but it was to support folks that needed like a bed that could support a heavier weight, or like the bed, the lifts to like the bed lifts to get you into bed. It supported like a heavier weight than the ones in the other room. Say the bathroom, the toilet was like, it was larger than the other ones to support folks that needed that, which is really great. But they actually ran out of the rooms that like had all of the things that I needed, and then they placed me in that room, which I like takes it away from folks that need that support. But I didn't have all of the things that I needed, but then also the toilet became really inaccessible for me. So my partner had to actually hold me over the toilet, which, if you can imagine, like, didn't feel great after having a cesarean in these bones, I must say. Like, it was not, like, it was just really a really like painful thing for me. And I didn't enjoy like I wanted the independence, you know, I wanted the privacy. I wanted a moment just to like be by myself in a washroom after giving birth, you know, but I couldn't have that in there. So that was something that was a struggle for me.
How old is your son now?
He just turned 6 on the weekend.
How is parenting going now? What have you learned in the years of, you know, having him? What kind of adjustments have you made?
Parenting is wonderful, but it's also it's hard. You know, some days are today was hard. I won't lie to you. I had a bit of a mental breakdown this morning. I love my son. I go to the ends of the earth for this child. And that being said, sometimes my own needs get put on the back burner. Sometimes I exert myself too much because I'm trying to create, an experience, doing something new. I definitely do more than I should some days. That is true. And I try to express pain. Pain is a unanimous thing that all people can feel. Age is not, a deciding factor in that. So it's not that I hide pain as a human condition from my child. However, I don't want him to see me in the bad parts of the pain, and it can get bad. So some nights it's like plastering this smile on my face, like singing the songs and reading the extra story and having the extra snuggles because that's what they need. And then you close the door and you go into your own room and then just like sob and like fall on your bed and you can't do anything else. And then society is like, well, why aren't your dishes done? Your in-laws come over and they're like, oh, someone hasn't done the dishes. Someone hasn't done the laundry. And you're like, if you only saw how much I do. And then the world is just like, it's not enough. It's not enough. And like, it's so hard sometimes to just keep being like your own cheerleader. But it's also so freaking important because sometimes the people around like just don't get it, especially if you look a certain way, or you're young, or you have makeup on, or you're happy, or you're whatever. They're like, that means you're well. That means you're not in pain. That means you're better. That means you're faking it. That means this. And, to try and just remove that from parenting and just be like, that kid thinks I'm the best parent. That kid wants no other parent than the parent that's in front of them, the parent that I can give, So it's just cheerleading for that. And like, that's enough, but it's also hard, but it is good. It is good.
I guess coming to the end, what advice or resources would you give someone either with your condition or just disability in general, for pregnancy, birth, or parenting that you found helpful?
Well, honestly, I think this is amazing. I think like these conversations and the people that listen to them, that's amazing, because community for me was like the number one thing, like talking to other people that get it. Personally speaking, from a Marfan perspective, if I'm being real, the Marfan Foundation, which is based out of the United States, but we're saving grace to me here in Canada, they're amazing. The doctors are incredible, so informative, and they care about the resources and that they give out. But yeah, for me, if I were to go through it a second time, I think that having a doula would be resourceful for me, somebody that can help advocate in even just to me, so that I can, in those moments that you feel in another realm, for me, would, I think, be lovely. And my partner.
And if you still feel up to it, we're going to do a bonus episode on you being a birth worker, a doula. So stay tuned for that. And thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'd love to do that.
Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com.